Well, good morning, everyone. Kate and Fiona here for our Core Confidence Facebook Live. And today we're continuing our conversation around self-belief and really what is self-belief and why it matters.
Yes, I love digging into this, Kate, because in a way, this is where we get to the really juicy bit about what's going on for us personally. And I know when we think about self-belief, one of the things I'm really interested in is what happens when we have strong self-belief, or conversely, what happens when we don't have strong self-belief. And I know you and I have been talking about this and this whole richness that happens when I've got that strong sense of self-belief, the way life opens up for me, the way it feels as though there's so many opportunities available. Life feels more flowful. There's a sense of, I can do this. I know there's so much possibility available. And this whole orientation of, even if I fail, well, I see that as feedback because, that allows me to iterate and I can try something new. And, I see other people more as, collaborators, as people, allies and resources that I can co-create with. But it gets very different if we're on the other side.
Yeah, I think this piece around, as you're talking, what comes up for me is, when you have that self-belief, you're the rock, right? Where you look to first when you want feedback is your own feedback, your own thoughts, your own perspectives. And you're able to, in some cases, rely on that. Yeah, you don't need to go searching. I think this piece around when we go searching outside ourselves with stakeholders or for evidence in people's faces, if we're in a room speaking or presenting, when we go looking for feedback elsewhere, immediately that's a destabilizing effect, right? Because most of the time when we're looking externally, we're interpreting what we see and the information that's coming back. Even if we're getting verbal feedback, there's an interpretation aspect that comes there. And so immediately there's a propensity to destabilize us. But when we can have that really good grounded sense of self, that doesn't mean that we don't seek feedback as appropriate. And we'll talk more about how do you seek it and calibrate it, which is the important step. But I think just this piece around being able to rely on yourself, being able to know what you know, perhaps have a really good calibrated view of, things where your weaknesses are, where your growth opportunities are, absolutely. But being able to look internally and over time, starting for that to be enough, right? This piece around, and there's so much in this. I think, we've been doing stacks of journaling on it. There's so much in it, but just, that piece around I can, that changes everything in terms of how you do life, right?
Yeah, I think, what I'm loving that you're bringing in here is about being realistic too. Like, this is not having an overinflated sense of self. This is really, as you say, knowing myself so well and having that grounded, rock solid sense of who I am and orienting around that and this sense of I can. Now, what we know is that, so many people tell us that self-belief is their big issue. 80% of people were talking to us about this, saying, I find it so hard to believe in myself. And what we know about that side of the equation is it's an I can't orientation. So we're immediately down this life contracting, feeling harder, feeling not so flowful. We can see other people as intimidating, or we can feel fearful about them personally or about the feedback they might give us. We're focused on how difficult and hard life is rather than all the opportunities that might be available. And, we tend to take failure really personally. And this is, I think, kind of the crux of the matter with self-belief. When I have a lack of self-belief, anytime that I get something wrong or something doesn't go the way I anticipated or I get negative feedback, I make it about me. I make it mean that I'm not good and that I don't have whatever it takes and that I'm not enough and all of this sort of thing. Whereas really, it's actually about a behavior or a particular thing. But because we've got low self-esteem or lack of self-belief, we make it mean so much more. And I think, we often talk about when we're in this place, we start going and getting evidence to validate the fact that, I can't do it. It's almost like our brains are, in that I can't orientation, searching out for evidence that says, I am hopeless, I can't do it.
Yeah, and that's how the brain works, right? Which is why self-belief is so critical, because for me, it's a perspective, or it sounds really, it's like a simple solution, but it is really just a choice, right? You can choose to believe I can, or you can choose to believe I can't. And I think that's the trigger in terms of the self-reflection. Notice the times that are coming up when you're like, oh, I can't do that. It happened for me. I think it's a story I share in the book around running a half marathon, right? Running's never been my thing. Hated cross country at school, all of those things. And I remember my brother-in-law saying, oh, I'm going to do the Blackmore's half marathon. And I immediately went, oh gosh, I could never do that. And that was the trigger to go, actually, would you train me? And yes, I'm going to do it with you. And so I think there's this whole piece around noticing it's a choice, noticing when you are in that orientation, doing it with compassion, because most of this is habitual, right? It's trained over time. And I think that why it's so critical is, if you go seeking for evidence that you can't, you will find it. The brain will find it. That's how it works. And so, as simple as it sounds, starting to shift and ask yourself a better question, which is, how can I? Immediately has your brain searching for resources, for people, for conversations of how you can actually do something. So it really is almost a belief orientation with how you go about doing life.
Yes. And the more you can become conscious of this, the more you can start to ask yourself that question. And as you say, to do it compassionately, like very often this is a lifetime of, kind of, almost undermining ourselves. So, it's not going to flip in an instant, but just that bit to get curious, to start to notice and get curious and go, well, how could I reframe this? How could I have an I can orientation here rather than I can't? How could I do things differently? And I think the more you're prepared to do that, the more you'll start to gain the evidence on the other side that actually, oh, I can do some things. It is easier than I thought. This is not as hard. And it is a choice. We are constantly making these choices. I think, when we're in our small acts of confidence, when we're in acts of confidence program, we really focus on these small acts of confidence, because what we know is that just trying one thing differently and just giving ourselves permission to explore and to play with one small thing starts to build a cycle of, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. I can do that. And now I'm prepared to try something else.
Yeah, that feedback cycle of, oh, I can do that, or that didn't work. What else could I do? Absolutely. And so I think we'll close with the brilliant quote I've loved for, at least the past decade, which is the Henry Ford quote. Whether you can or whether you can't, you'll usually be right? So that's that whole perspective piece. It's a choice here. And I think it's incredibly powerful. Again, play with this compassionately, be curious, and most importantly, experiment with those small acts, because that's about creating a new book of evidence and feedback that will start to stairway you to your core confidence. So if you've enjoyed today's conversation, please leave us a note in the chat feed or reach out. And of course, if you'd like to go deeper with your relationship with core confidence, please visit our website, coreconfidence.com.au.